If you wanted to teach a class online, you had to get it evaluated through Quality Matters. That would at least tell the the deans and the VPs that this class is set up right, it's organized okay, it should work. All the pieces are there, and then you've got to be really careful to evaluate how the students do at the end of the term, and are they getting it? Are there complaints? So you've got to be on top of that and really be very careful to analyze it. But you need to have a system in place, and I think Quality Matters. There may be other types of systems out there that help to make sure the quality is there. I think the other thing is that nobody teaches online unless they get some kind of training. So they should have a training course in how to present online, how to do this. So the training is important. I think it's the same for students. I don't think a student should be allowed to take a class online until they've had some kind of a class to teach them how to do this, because right now, just as it is, teaching online or taking a class online is difficult for some students. So by at least giving them some kind of orientation, I think it would help. But you have to be concerned about the quality and have some kind of system in place to measure that quality and approve courses to be taught online, and not just, otherwise you get a flood. And I notice you guys have, what, 20 programs that are all online, which is, to me, is remarkable. I've never seen a college have that many programs online, totally online. So that's saying you really embrace that technology, and as long as there's a system in place to really measure the quality and then measure the differences in success versus face-to-face, then you can keep improving on that as the years go by.
Hello, I'm
Hi.
Judy Dunn. I'm also computer science, like Rob. And my question is on assessment and course, whatever you'd like to address, course, program, institutional assessment. We've tried different approaches, and we've made some good approaches, I think, and then maybe veered off and made some not so good, and we're kind of in a process of transition here. I'd like to hear your philosophy on how, how and if course assessment, program assessment, and institutional assessment should be done.
Okay. And you're talking about like program review or program evaluation when you talk about assessment.
Well, we actually have it as two separate pieces here, even though we've kind of stopped doing it.
Okay.
We just want to get HLC off.
HLC?
That's our accreditation.
Well, of course, everybody wants to get them off your back, but yeah.
To be honest, we do a lousy job of assessment.
Well, now assessing outcomes, that's a whole other ballgame. Is that what you're talking about? Outcome assessment? Any kind of it. And of course,
We're not talking about quizzes and classes.
okay, there's 100 kinds of assessment, obviously. Well, program assessment, there needs to be a process. I know you all have a program review process, right, that you have to do, what, every 4 years, 5 years? And that's pretty much standard everywhere I've ever been. How you use it is another story. So we implemented at Umpqua a new process where it was an outline. You had to follow that outline. So you couldn't just, because before we'd have the English department would have a 50-page report. The chemistry department, it'd be like 4 pages. So, and maybe that was okay, but, there's so a little less to go on. But here, we had a consistent format. Everybody had to use that format. We developed a set of metrics, so some data that was consistent, and the IR would crank that data out every fall for all the programs. So you knew what your metrics were for the year, actually for the previous year. And so that went into your program review. And so everybody did their program review, or whatever percentage that needed to do it for that year. But the key was then the report wouldn't just go back up on the shelf and, okay, 5 years from now I'll have to pull it off and change a few words and then I'll resubmit it, right? But we made them take it out every year. So in the spring, the faculty would take their report out. Let's say they did it last year. They'd take it out, look at it. There'd be a goals section, and they would look to see how did we do with our goals over this past year. Do we need to change any of those goals? They'd look at budget implications, and there'd be a section in there on, what kind of budget needs will I have, funding needs over the next 5 years. And they'd look at that and make adjustments. So it would be a living document. It would be something that would be adjusted each year to help with your program. Now, we had looked at also implementing a program viability process to evaluate, the strength of programs, because otherwise, every place I'd ever been, if you wanted to, cut a program, it was usually at the very top, and we would, send the note out, well, that program's not needed anymore, so, we don't need you. Not a lot of data, not a lot of decision making that is tied to anything quantitative. So I read this book by somebody that had implemented the system at universities across the country, where they rated each program on a scale of 1 to 100 based on a whole series of metrics. And you could develop whatever metrics made sense for your college. So we got together at Umpqua, brought a bunch of faculty in, and we talked about metrics. What metrics make sense to look at programs? Obviously, enrollment trends and success rates and graduation rates, and for CTE programs, did they get a job? And so some key metrics that would dictate whether a program is healthy or not. We came up with about 15 metrics, and those then were distilled down to develop a score. And then every program on campus got a score from 1 to 100. And then we developed a program viability committee that met to look at that list and to work with the faculty on the programs that were struggling, let's say the bottom third of the list. And so that was made up of faculty and some deans and the VP. And so that group would then bring the faculty in for the programs that are struggling and talk about developing an improvement plan. And they would develop an improvement plan based on what they thought were factors that would help them improve that program and change those metrics, whatever the ones that were really bringing the score down. And what we found, it was a chance to discuss and talk about what's wrong with the program and how can we help you, rather than, okay, you got a score of 20, so you're gone. That wasn't what it was for. So they were then given a year. We would then look at the metrics the following year and see if there was some improvement being shown and how the plan was being implemented. Now, if the faculty didn't implement any of the plan, didn't try, didn't look at it, didn't care, then at that point the program could be eliminated. But if it was moving it all in the right direction, and they were trying and working at it, then they were given another year. And then at the end of 2 years, it was either decided whether the program was okay and could move on, or some other action needed to be taken. So at least it was taking emotions somewhat out of the process, and it was trying to quantify it to make it more data-driven. And it seemed to be working when I left Umpqua, and I hope they're still using it, actually. I think it's a positive thing. But then that's tied to program review, because a lot of the same metrics that come out in the program review data is in the program viability. And my theory was, and again, I wasn't there long enough to see how this would work, that if this new program review model, where faculty are looking at their program reviews every year and tweaking them, and they can see the data for the previous year, then they'll see that there's some trends moving in the wrong direction long before it pops up as a negative program viability score. And so the idea is to just help faculty improve their programs and keep them moving in the right direction, and being successful. So that was one model that seemed to work. There's lots of others out there, but you got to be consistent. You got to have a process that people buy into. And I've been places, in fact, as a faculty member myself, where I just did it because the dean said I had to do it, and I did as little as I had to do to get it done, because I knew nobody would look at it for the next 5 years. And that's not the way we want it. No. It's not that uncommon. Yeah. But that's not, I don't think that's a healthy thing, and believe me, we got way too much to do to be doing busy work. If there's got to be a good reason to do what we're doing, if it's outside of the classroom, right? I mean, because you're limited in how much time you have to put it in outside the classroom. So you want it to be something that is going to help your program and make it more successful.
What do you see that would be your biggest challenges in the first 6 months on the job here?
Well, I think in any new job, at least for me, the biggest challenge has been to get to know everybody, get to know the culture, and understand the system, both the college system and the state system. When you come in from an outside, especially outside the state and region, it's a little daunting. I've never been in a state that had AQUIP, for instance, so that's new to me. I've studied it and looked at it from the outside, but I know that's quite different than being engrossed in it, right? So, that would be my biggest challenge, just getting to know everybody. I try really hard to meet each person individually and get to know them a little bit and understand them. As a VP, I love to just come and sit in on classes, and so I would try to come and sit in on every single full-time faculty member's class the first year. Now, I know that's a lot. There's, 100 and some odd of you? I've never had that many faculty before, but I think that's important. It tells me how you teach, what your passion is, how you interact with students. Plus, it gives me a chance to interact with some students myself. So I like to do that, get to know you individually, and then obviously as a group, and as a culture, because all of you combined as a faculty, and then all of you as a staff, you have a very distinct culture. I don't know what that is yet, because I've only had a little snapshot of you today. So it would take time for me to learn that, and that's how I can best integrate myself into the college and be most useful. Is I have to understand that, and I have to know all of you and feel like you're open to working with me and that you trust me. So, and those things take time. So that'd be at least 6 months, if not a year.
Welcome to campus. I'm Kathy Snyder, the Surgical Technology Program Director and Instructor. We've had some challenges over the years trying to put together a really kind of a comprehensive professional development program for faculty, particularly for those who are new to teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the ideas has come is let's launch kind of something we call a Center for Teaching Excellence, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And so would you mind sharing your vision for what that might look like, or how that might all come together for us?
Okay. Well, I think it's a great idea. I've seen that almost at every college I've been at. There's been some kind of a program that's been funded either by the college or through a grant or something where there's a pot of money available, and there'd be 2 or 3 faculty members that were excited about that and wanted to help organize it, and they would help set it up. And whether it was, a little, in one place it was a little library of resources, so we found a spot where it could be just faculty resources, whether it was teaching pedagogy or, lots of different ways to help faculty. It would be to bring in speakers, whether you brought in an outside speaker, you had one of your own talk about certain things. At Umpqua, we set up a whole faculty teaching workshops, and it was mainly for adjuncts and new faculty, but anybody could come. And the idea was to try and expose faculty to different delivery systems, different ways to do things, best practices that maybe they've heard about but hadn't implemented or tried it in their classroom. And it was trying to do hands-on, where they'd develop a lesson plan using this new delivery system or new pedagogy, and then they'd take it and use it in the classroom, and then they'd come back to the next session and share how it worked and what didn't work and those kind of things. So I think there's different things, but having a program in place that's funded where you can bring in speakers or you can send faculty to certain things and have some kind of a plan set up, especially for new faculty, I think it's critical. I saw in the job announcement they said something about wanting this person to help develop with the faculty some kind of faculty orientation process. Is there not anything in place now where okay, so that would be something we'd really work on. And there's different models out there, but you do have to commit as a college some funds to be able to make those things happen, and then have a group of faculty that are willing to work on it to help it, be what'll work for all of you. So.
John Sanford, psychology instructor. We mentioned briefly that wanting to keep HLC offer back, and you mentioned AQUIP, which is one of the accreditation paths in the HLC. What is your vision for accreditation and how that fits into the operation of an institution?
Well, I see accreditation as is almost the same thing as a strategic plan in that you're having to collect a bunch of data and present it in a certain format to be able to show that you're doing a good job and what your plans for the future are. We just got through at the college I was at in Connecticut our 10-year accreditation. Now, it took us 2.5 years. I mean, if I look from the time we started the process, I mean, just started talking about it and setting up the committees, to me going to the commission and getting the blessing and the letter with our recommendations, and it was about a 2.5-year process. Now, for a year of that, that's all we did, was write that report, okay, and develop it. And that's a lot of resources. It took a lot of committee work, a lot of other things on the campus didn't get done because we had to do that. So when I look at AQUIP, you know, and again, I don't know it in depth because I haven't been under it, but it seems like if you're doing some things continuously and you're working on them over time, it just sounds like a better process. Now, we had just started to do something like that in Oregon. The Northwest Commission had started to say, all right, for, you know, year one, you'll deal with standards 1 and 2, okay? And you won't get a visit necessarily, but somebody will look at your stuff and comment on it. And then the next year, you'll look on the next standard. And so they were spreading them out and trying to do it, but it wasn't really a continuous improvement process like AQUIP. So I like it from what I've seen. I'm sure there's parts of it that may not be, you know, you may not be enamored with. I don't know, but I would certainly think it's critical. You have to take that into account no matter what you're doing. So when you develop a strategic plan, or I see that, you know, one of the goals here is to maybe develop an academic plan, then that's got to be part of it. How is that integrated in, and how are we going to make those things happen so that we're satisfying those, but we're also moving forward. And we're not just standing still doing this report because it's required. I mean, then it gets back to the program review thing where you're just doing it because it's required. If it's a valuable process where you're coming out with some, you know, just doing the process, you're learning about your organization and how to make it better, and that is then reflected in your strategic plan and your academic plan, then it becomes a more dynamic process that it has some use to it. But otherwise, you're just spinning your wheels.
Good to see you again. My name is Ed Olson. I'm the program director for Integrated Systems Technology here at the college.
Mm-hmm.
My question for you is, you know, we've been kind of entertaining maybe some changes to our core abilities here at the college. And I guess what is your vision for the selection and the integration of those types of core abilities, and then how they relate to the other academic areas that we have?
So how long have you had those? There's 4 of them? Have you had them for a long time? 5 years? I mean, I think colleges need to review those and see if they're still relevant, and because things change. So maybe it should be. I've never seen this happen, but maybe it should be like program review, where every so many years you look at those things and you see if changes need to be made. And it sounded like when I read about your, you know, how you developed your core abilities, it was a pretty inclusive process, and you went through and as groups came up with these things, right? And that's the way it should be. So you are the experts on what those abilities should be, and should have the biggest voice in how those things are developed. So, but I think you need to review them from time to time. I mean, the ones you had, to be honest with you, they're pretty standard everywhere I've been. And there's nothing wrong with that. The challenge is to make sure students understand that, you know, when you come out, this is what you should be able to do. This is where you should have some some competency in. And if you can get the students to really embrace those and understand them, then that's probably the next step.
Questions?
One of the other questions that we've been asking as we've gone through this process is, can you give us a sketch or an outline of your own management style?
Sure. Well, I guess I would consider it to be participatory. I certainly do not like and does not fit into my personality to be a top-down manager. I like to work from a consensus standpoint, work with teams, work with groups. I like to empower people. I like to take the decision-making and diffuse it down. That's why I like that ideas model. I think the more people that can get engaged in the governance of the college and the governance of instruction, the stronger the academic area will be, the stronger the college will be. Obviously, there's got to be a structure there and some gatekeepers, and I don't mind doing that, but my whole premise is to work collaboratively with faculty and others at the college to move us forward. And I think you do that with teams and committees and groups that have charges that allow them to make decisions and move it forward. So there's lots of different levels on how that works, but that's the type of process I like to work with. And I like to empower my deans and directors to do their job, and we have to work closely together to make sure we're being consistent and fair across the board. But if, I guess the litmus test for me is if the communication is flowing both ways, people are not afraid to come and say, oh, I disagree with that, or explain this, or because sometimes we get all busy, and my best intentions will be to share what's going on and communicate openly, but sometimes it doesn't happen. All it takes is one person coming saying, I need some more information about that, I don't understand this. Then that opens things up. So there has to be that flow and that trust both ways, and then it can be a fun experience and we get a lot done.
So then to follow up with that, how do you handle situations where a consensus is not always met? So there's some contention, and you've got to be the one that steps in and makes a decision, like or dislike.
Yep. Well, I mean, that happens, and you got to do it. So so you do it. I mean, you give people the opportunity for feedback. You give the people the opportunity for an input, and there's whole different levels of decisions that have to be made, and some it just needs to be made at the administrative level. And I think from a previous faculty member, if I trusted my administrators, that's fine. I don't mind that. If I didn't trust them, then no, I don't want them to make any decision. So the trust is so important. But if it's not working with a trust factor, then it's nothing's going to work. So I don't mind giving that decision making out. I don't mind having people discuss things and provide feedback and input. But if consensus can't be made, then that's when a decision typically will have to be made. And if it's me or the president, then we'll make that decision. But I can promise you that it'll be done after everybody's had a chance to say their piece and provide input, and then hopefully, if decisions are made and maybe they're agreed upon or not agreed upon by some people, you still need to be able to go back and explain your reasoning, what it was that you went through to make that decision. And that's all I could ever ask for if I was a faculty member at that point.
How could we best improve advising for our students?
Well, I'm I'm not sure exactly how it's working here at the college, but I know from what I've read, and I know from talking to the other groups, there are some concerns about advising, and certainly I had big concerns where I was before, and pretty much everywhere there's been concerns about, you know, and not that it wasn't being done right or, you know, with a lot of concern for students, but not as efficiently as possible. So you got to sit down and work with student services. There needs to be, you know, at UMCWA we had a committee that we formed between the two vice presidents, made up of faculty and deans on one side, and then student services, you know, directors, et cetera, on the other side. And we met every 2 weeks. So it wasn't a matter we waited till something blew up in our face. We met every 2 weeks, and we dealt with issues, any issue that had come up on the table that had, you know, impact in both areas, which, as you probably are aware, is almost everything. So advising was a big one. So we'd get together and we'd talk about how do we do advising. I've been at a college where there was not much consistency between the plan sheets that were given out to students, the catalog, and what advisors were telling students. And when you have that kind of disconnect, students get hurt. They take classes they don't need, or worse, they get frustrated and they quit. So it's important that the advising model you have, and it can be with faculty being a key piece or not, it's got to be done consistently and make sure all the information is clear and that everybody who's doing advising knows what they're talking about and can give the correct information to students. Now, I understand now that for returning students, you all advise most of the returning students. Is that right? In your area? Oh, they self-advise. Yeah, see, yeah. Well, at Central Oregon, we put a stop to most of that, not all of it, but advisors or students could not register online unless they got an okay from their advisor, and that means Banner, we have Banner, had to release it. Now, if the advisor was doing their job, that meant they required the student to come in, sit down with them, and made sure they were doing things right. Some advisors might get a little lazy and just, you know, give them the okay without looking at their stuff. Now, then the model breaks down. But if you're doing your job, you know, that works. But self-advising doesn't work. Maybe if you're 45 and you've been in industry and all that, you can self-advise pretty well. But for an 18 or 19-year-old, you can't self-advise. You're gonna screw up somewhere along the line. So I believe in a model that requires students to meet with an advisor, you know, not just their first semester, but every semester. And we've seen, and I've seen research that shows that, and we just implemented this at Quinnebog that at what was it, 15 hours, 30, and 45, they had to meet with an advisor. So it wasn't every semester if they were going part-time, but when they reached those benchmark number of credits, they had to meet with an advisor, go over their education plan, and make sure they were on track. I think that kind of oversight not only helps the student, but it's going to help us through retention, right? I mean, and completion rates. We're going to improve in that because students are going to stay on track and do better. So there's different things you need to be aware of in advising, but it's got to be very well coordinated between student services and academic affairs if you're going to involve both staff in that process, which is what I understand you have here.
How do you handle conflict between a faculty member and a student?
Well,
not that ever happens.
Thank goodness. Most of the process when I was a dean, it always went to student service. You know, the VP of student services had to deal with those things. But I would go, as vice president, I would go in and I would advocate for the faculty member. And I think that's a good model. So the faculty member needs an advocate, whether it's a dean or a VP, but somebody that can go in and make sure things are being done fairly. And so to just have that kind of a conflict go, I don't know what kind of a grievance and discipline type process you have here, but if student issues go to student services, that's fine, but If it's involving a faculty member, which I'm sure a lot of them are, then you need an advocate there, somebody that can be at the same level or above the people that are making the decisions on the other side. And if you work well together, then you'd make sure the process was fair. Is that kind of where you're coming from?
That answered it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to ask a kind of a follow-up on that point. What kind of criteria would you use to determine, is this a valid student concern and the faculty member is clearly in the wrong? Or if this is, a disturbed kind of student who's maybe not seeing things quite objectively? What kind of criteria do you use to determine that?
Well, I would say if they have a weapon in their back pocket, but that's probably out of bad taste after what's happened recently. But I mean, that's a legitimate question because, I love student services and they're great people, but they look at things from a student perspective, as they should. Looking at it from a faculty perspective is different. I guess I can't list off criteria. It's where, if it's me as vice president, I've got to know you. So that's why I'm going to take a lot of time to get to know you. And I'll know whether you're a wingnut or not. Okay? And if you're not a wingnut, then that puts you in a whole other category that I can trust that pretty much what you're saying is probably true. And God bless students. Sometimes they're not trying to, twist the truth, but they're trying to, twist the truth maybe. And so there's no criteria. I've just got to know you, and if I know you and trust you, then I can advocate for you. But I will tell you that if I don't think it is the student and it's you, then I will tell you that, not in front of everybody, but I'll sit down with you ahead of time and I'll say, or after we meet with a student, say, this doesn't look good for you. I have to say I believe the student, and then it's up to you to try and help me to believe otherwise. I've seen some that are very good both ways, both students and faculty members, but it really gets down again to trust and how well we know each other and how well we work together.
There are national concerns and local ones about students graduating and also being retained. And what kinds of ways might you do to increase those kinds of issues?
Well, the whole student success thing is what all the colleges are now looking at, and it's all about retention and completion rates. I talked to the president. He said that they're adopting the Complete College America here in Wyoming, which is a national set of metrics that look at student success, and that's what I'm used to. That's what Connecticut had implemented. So clearly, when we look at retention, obviously there's lots of ways to look at retention, right? Within the course and from fall to fall and beginning to graduation. I mean, there's a lot of retention categories. So, and I know Complete College America uses 2 or 3 of those different metrics. So you've got to know how you're doing as a college, be able to track that data, to look at it and say, we're getting better, we're getting worse, we're really needing to make some changes. And then, you need to be implementing strategies to increase retention. In a lot of colleges, they are hiring retention specialists, somebody that can come in and really work with the faculty to really be one-on-one with them to develop strategies for their classes that can help them with their students. I've seen that work okay, but as long as faculty are open to doing whatever they think they could to try and help retention, I think that's where you want to be. It could be as little as calling a student when they don't show up 2 or 3 times in a row, to encourage them to get tutoring or help. Do you guys have professional tutors? Do you have peer tutors? How do you tutoring here? It varies.
It's really a combination of the two.
Okay. So, you got to have strong tutoring and ability to get students the help they need. And you're the front line. So you need to be able to do that and take that as one of your responsibilities. I certainly have seen faculty that said that's not my job, that's student services job. I'm just here to teach. And I don't like that, attitude. I want to see somebody that wants to help the student any way they can within reason. The student still has to take responsibility for learning and for doing the work and completing the assignments, but somebody that really is passionate about helping that student succeed. There's a lot of retention techniques out there, and a lot of them depend on the college you're at and the culture and the types of students you have and some of the issues. Some work better with older non-traditional students, some work better with students right out of high school, so you'd want to have a retention, enrollment management plan. Now, I saw a lot of information in everything I read about an enrollment management plan. I could not find the enrollment management plan. Is there indeed an enrollment management plan that you all are familiar with?
Not yet. They're working on one.
Okay. I think that's an enormously important document, and that has got to be developed with faculty and student services working together. Because it looks at retention, both from the classroom standpoint. I think one of the retention strategies I think really works well is how you deliver your course material. How do you engage students? I'm a big one to focus on the guide by the side rather than the talking head. I think you've got to, because the statistics all show that people lose their focus after 12 minutes or some silliness like that. So you've got, and I've seen very successful faculty even teaching A&P in an auditorium setting. And the faculty member every 10 minutes would stop the class, have them get into pair, just to the next person next to them, ask a question, and they'd ask a question, they'd talk about it for 30 seconds, and then they would share. Just simple little things that keep the students engaged, interested, wanting to stay and come to that class every time. I think that is a huge retention tool that you can use. That's something I would love to see, more classes and workshops and things to share those kind of delivery systems and how to implement those things in your classes. It takes a lot of time. I know in my class, I went to a total outcome-based model. The last couple of years I taught before I moved into administration, and I saw a big difference, but it was a lot of work to try and take classes where, to be honest with you, it's easy for me to stand up there and go through my PowerPoint that I developed 10 years ago. And yeah, I tweaked it a little bit from year to year, but pretty much it's the same. And it's so much easier for me to do that and talk for 50 minutes than it is to try and get them into groups and come up with questions for them to talk about and then share out, and then how do you evaluate that? And it's just a lot of work. But the payoff is incredible, at least what I saw. So those kind of retention things are things that faculty can focus on. Retention in other areas are some things that student services staff, advisors and counselors, et cetera, can work on. So you got to be a team and work together to try and come up with a plan, and that's where the enrollment management plan comes in. It has those strategies laid out and how they're going to be implemented and how you're going to evaluate them, and then ultimately see whether or not they do help to improve retention over time.
Hello, my name is Paula, and I work in the library. And so I just want to turn for a minute to academic support services. And we're in the process of looking at some reorganizing, moving towards a more learning commons approach where the library, student success center are all in one area. And it's still we're just working on it. We've looked at a few different models. We haven't made all the decisions yet about who all would be in there, how it would work. And so I was just curious, I know in your past you have been over those areas, and have you worked in a place where there was a model like that, or looked at some of those? And yeah,
I've seen pieces of that kind of things used in the library or advising centers or learning centers. But what, I got just a little piece of that from Karen and some others today, and it sounds very exciting. I think there's some real potential there. But, it sounds like you've got a ways to go, but, I think that you're on the right track. You look at some other models, you see what is working at other places, and then try to adapt that to the culture you have here and the types of students. And those kind of activities, I think, where you bring people together and able to work with students in different ways in one place I've seen that certainly work very well in a lot of other colleges. So I applaud you for doing that, because that's also a lot of work to set that up. So, but I've never seen one quite like what I'm thinking I'm hearing you're saying you're going to do here. So it's exciting. Yeah.
Any last questions? Okay.
In my classes, I find a lot of students are engaged. Unfortunately, they're not engaged with me. They're engaged with their cell phones and texting. What's your solution to this problem?
Well, if I have to say one reason the one positive of me not teaching anymore is I got out of teaching before I had to deal with all that stuff. So, well, one of the things I used my last few years of teaching was we would set norms for the class at the beginning. So the first class period, we go through the syllabus and the outcomes and all that, but we set some norms. So I don't know if you've ever set norms, as a group, where it's not me, the instructor, saying you shall do this and this and this and not this and this and this. It's the class, and I'd explain what a norm is, which is a behavior that is done in an organization. And I would then open it up and say, well, what kind of norms do you think we should have in this class, as far as how we, showing up on time, for instance, the way we share information or questions. Do you raise your hand, or do you just blurt out? 100 classroom management things that you have to deal with, right? But we'd talk about them, and then the class would start listing them out. And inevitably, cell phones would be right at the top, because that annoys as many students as it does the instructor, I think. And so you'd come up with these norms, and the norms would be posted. I'd put them on a big sheet of paper, and I'd put plastic on it, and I'd bring that to class every time and set it right up on the board, and so it was very clear. Those were the norms. That's the behaviors. And of course, there had to be consequences if you broke one of those norms. And the consequence was you had to bring candy for the whole class at the next class. So, so it worked pretty well. But I mean, the idea is to help the class to come up with ways that they feel they can provide some ways that would enhance their learning ability in the class and make it more pleasant for everybody else. And so it's not you as the instructor that's coming up with all these things and dictating them, but you're letting them come up with them. And then, of course, if they don't come up with this, you've got your list over here. If they don't come up with them, you throw them in. But, so you're going to get them in there. But you're hopefully, students will come up with most of those, so you're not having to do them yourself. So that's just one technique I've seen. But that's a problem. I can't even imagine. There was no smartphones when I last taught. So, the texting, oh my God, I can't even, you just have a box, right? You just make them put the phone in the box when they come in. I don't know, how do you do that? If you have some kind of jamming software that you can throw a jamming signal or something. Well, that would work, yeah. That's hard, yeah, it is. I mean, the old system, it was just students talking to each other in the back of the room, right? I mean, it's, and passing notes, yeah. Or the big one, falling asleep, I was a big one for throwing erasers at people. So I guess today you'd probably get arrested for something, yeah.
All right, thank you, Dr. Tomlin. I think we're out of time here, so.
Thank you all very much. It's very nice meeting you all, and the best of luck in what you're doing. You're doing a lot of good work.